Hello, hello. Can you hear me well? Yeah. Cool. I hope you have a good break, some caffeine in the veins. So it's the right time to talk about microfrontends, right? Cool. So today I'm here sharing the stage with Max, that is my spare partner. And more important, remember to every tweet to tag your tweet with the Frontend Developer Love hashtag. It's very important because we can retrieve very quickly your pictures and all your feedback. OK, so let's start. Who am I? I'm VP of Architecture of DAZN. You can find us outside. We have a booth. So if you are interested in what we are doing, just engage with us. I'm a Google developer expert on web technologies. And I'm the manager of the London JavaScript community.
Hello, and good morning. My name is Max. I'm principal engineer at DAZN. You can find me on Twitter at _ yes, there is an _ Max Gallo. And I don't have fancy title like Luca, so I made up just two of them. So I'm a pizza maker expert and Sofa community manager. But that's not the reason why we are here. The reason why we are here is that we first want to give an answer to a question. Why having two speakers on a stage? I've been to a lot of conferences, and usually when I see two speakers, I always struggle to see what's the value. Why two of them instead of one? So basically, we went through this question, and we found an answer. And our answer is that we want to tell you a story about something from two different angles, two sides of the same coin. So every time you will see a slide with a white background, that slide has an architecture overview about the problem. That slide is coming more from Luca's word that could give you some input on some thought about what we are about to discuss. When instead you see a dark slide, it's dark because, I don't know, we love dark IDEs. When we see a dark slide, it's a development inside. So everything we're going to discuss is about seeing from the developer point of view. Because microfrontends, it's something that touches everything, from architecture to the way your company is organized. And more important, it affects how developers work in their daily life, normally. And this is why we want to give you two sides of the same subject. But in order to jump straight to the content, I'm handing over to Luca for the agenda.
Thanks. OK, so what we are going to discuss today. So we thought that we have to provide you a bit of background of what we are doing and how we achieved that. So we started with asking three questions. Why we need microfrontends? What is the implementation that we have done in DAZN? And finally, how you can implement tomorrow when you go back to your company. OK, so let's start from the beginning, right? Because there is always a nice story when you start a journey like that. So 2 years ago, I joined this company called DAZN. And it was, let's say, a good challenge. You know, we were a startup at the end. There was more or less 100 people, not many tech people. And we work mainly with third parties. And what happened is one day, it was probably my second day in the company, and the CTO came to me and said, listen, Luca, one thing that you have to bear in mind, this company is going to grow, and grow very, very fast. And when you design something, when you decide to create a new feature, when you really architect our platform, you need to bear in mind that what you are doing is going to impact hundreds of developers. Funny enough, I was the second technical person inside that team. So thinking for designing stuff for hundreds of people, distributed teams all over the world, I was quite non-trivial, I would say.
My experience was slightly different, because I received a call from Luca. I was looking for a job back then. I knew Luca from the JavaScript community in London. And I received a call. I thought, oh, look, Max, I've got a cool project. You should come work with it with us. OK, what is it? It's called DAZN. I was like, how do you spell it? What? And so we went through the spelling problem. And then he started to tell me, oh, this is a cool project. This is a greenfield project. We have millions of users. And you are basically the third developers that is going to join the company. I say, OK, it looks too good to be true, to be honest. But I'm here talking about that experience. So something happened, and I said yes.
That's great. OK, so let's go and let's crack on properly. Why do we need microfrontends? So let's start from the beginning, right? So usually, when you have like a greenfield project, or when you, I don't know, start a startup, for instance, the first thing that you try to do quickly is validating your business idea. Because the reality is, yes, tech is important, but it's not going to fly, and you won't be able to spend a lot of time on your application if your business idea doesn't work, right? I think many of us saw a great proposition that didn't scale at the pace that we expected because the business idea wasn't solid enough on the background. And usually when you have this kind of situation, you tend to work in a way that is, you want to quickly validate with real users what you have in mind. So usually what you do, you just create a monolith on the backend APIs. Then you have your own database. It could be SQL, no SQL, it doesn't matter. And then you have like a single-page application because, hey, we have like tons of framework in the JavaScript community. And what they can do is speeding up the development of those single-page applications. That's brilliant. It works because we can immediately have in a few weeks' time or month the entire stack that is up and running and share with our potential users and have feedback from them, gaining from them. And that's brilliant. Let's assume that then your application starts to really have traction. So the business idea works. And then suddenly you start to have a solid user base that start to use your system constantly. So the first thing that you usually do is start to scaling the API layer because vast majority of the time, in particular nowadays, you tend to work with thin clients. Therefore, you spend a lot of time around the backend because the whole logic is there. The real business logic is there. And what you do is you take your monolith, you start to have put a load balancer in front of it, and through round robin, you just pass a request from one application server to another application server. And in that case, if you think about the impact inside your team, at the beginning, maybe there were just a few developers, maybe just one team. And slowly but steady, you start to have more people that are joining your company. And you start to have maybe 2 teams, 3 teams, maybe distributed teams. And that is very tricky because you cannot just think about your business idea or how to implement that. You need to think also the impact that your architecture or your design is going to have inside your organization because the context makes everything. So in this case, we have like our front end that is, let's say, our single-page application. We have our application server that are scaling, maybe with auto-scaling now that we are on the cloud. And we have our database that can scale sharding. You pick the way that you prefer, or you can use read replica, completely up to you. And you can have something that is working and scaling alongside. Till one day, you have too many users. And you start to have bottlenecks inside your application. And that is a real problem. Because then you start to say, OK, I cannot scale horizontally anymore, because the cost is going to be insane. And to be fair, do I need the whole application layer that is scaling horizontally? Probably not. I just have like some key part of my APIs that has to scale properly. So thanks God, we have like microservices at rescue here. Because usually what you do, you have like a clear idea how your business works. You know exactly how your application is scaled, because obviously you put observability as the first citizen inside your architecture. And then you have yes, so then you start to take one API per time. You start to wrap inside a nice microservice. Each microservice can pick its own database. It could be SQL, no SQL. It's completely up to you. There isn't anymore a shared decision for the entire application. Obviously, in order to do that, maybe you start to have like multiple API gateways, and that is useful because you start to segregate that. And what is the effect for your team? Your team suddenly start to have fast iteration because they don't have anymore to be compliant on all the rules that were made a few months before with the core team that was designing everything. So you can have your own technology. You can start to have your own rules inside the team. A team is owning just a part of the application, and he owns the domain end-to-end. That's brilliant. Meanwhile, on the front end, we still have the single-page application, but the team is growing, right?
So on the front end, we have this situation when you see at the back end and everything is nice because you have smaller teams, they are responsible for a smaller part of the application, and you instead, you are responsible as a front-end developer about everything, from the sign-in journey to the sign-up to how does the help section works, or in our case about the video player, the player streaming, which is extremely complicated. You need to be responsible for everything. So the impact with the teams is that, first of all, we have still a single code base in the front end. And that single code base means that if there is one team working that code base, everything is nice. If there are two teams, you need to have some agreement. If there are 3 teams or 5 teams in different locations, it starts becoming a lot of communication. Why communication? Because you need to decide things. It's JavaScript. You need to pick 2,000 languages just to start, 2,000 choices just to start a project. You need to pick the CSS library. You need to pick which is the right pattern. Are we going to write in an object-oriented way? We want to be more functional. How you decide those things across 5 teams in the front end? It's impossible, and you move slower. The outcome is that you pick decision at a slower rate. And when you have your big front end, which is managed by a lot of teams, basically everyone is scared to touch anything. If you need to change something like I want to use Vue instead of React, that will mean a rewrite of everything in the front end, which is something that sometimes you can't afford as a company. And I'm not going to blame the company for that. There are good reasons. And also, if you, again, see at the infrastructure, you see the microservices, you see the backend, the teams are smaller, are more functional, and you think about, maybe there is something we can do in the front end to fix that problem.
So the question that came up in my mind is, how do we solve this problem? Because it's not the first time that I'm in a company with the same problems. I worked before in large organizations with hundreds of developers. But it's tricky. It's really tricky to manage this thing. And when you have this kind of architecture, inevitably, in particular on the front end, you start to think about abstraction. You start to have a core team that is, let's say, develop the core libraries, and they start to share stuff. And it's fine for the first 6 months. After a year, everything became unmaintainable, because if you're not very, let's say, if you're not following strictly the rules that was made by the core team, then it becomes really unmanageable. But what if we can start to think about what microservices did? What if we take a step back? We take a step back and we try to figure out if the principles that are run behind microservices could be applied to the front end. And here is where microfrontends are coming from. So what we try to do here is try to think, okay, so let's take a step back. So what is making great a microservice? So we can have independent releases, we can have segregation, one single responsibility for each single microservice. There are tons of principles that are very important on microservices. What if we apply on the microfrontends? And that's why we came up with this idea. So basically now, as you can see, we have something that is completely different, that resembles to a certain extent what we had at the beginning, when we were like just one team. So we can have just one team that is working end-to-end on a specific domain. Because the reality, though, is that every time that we put our hands on the keyboard and we are writing some code, we need not only to obviously enjoy ourselves and write the great code, but also create business value. So the reality here is that with this technique, what we can do is having a cross-functional team that is completely independent, managing infrastructure, backend APIs, and front-end. And that's brilliant, because now we can really have the power of microservices applied to the front-end.
For a team member, that is really a game changer. And why? First of all, autonomy. How many times have you found yourself in a position when you want to pick a decision, you want to do something that you know it was working, it could have been working better, but you can't for different reasons, because the code base is too big, because we need to deliver. Splitting the front-end single-page application into smaller micro-frontends allow you to have autonomy within your micro-frontend. And it's not only about that. You have autonomy inside the business domain. Because if you think about your team responsible from everything, as Luca said, from API to DB to the front end itself, you can't complain anymore about a badly written contract for API. You can't complain anymore about, oh, those guys in the back end, they don't know what they are doing. Because the back end guy is sit next to you. You can tell him or her, look, we need to change that because this is going to cost us 3 more requests per user. And you do that at stand-up. You do that in your normal team life cycle. You don't need to organize special meeting or cross-team location adjusting and playing with time zones. It's all naturally coming from the team itself. And from that autonomy, it comes responsibility, because you are responsible of the whole journey of a user on a specific part of your application, but you're responsible on the complete stack from the back end to the front end and everything in the middle. And that's also easier. Imagine being on call on the whole front end of Facebook. Imagine that Facebook was a big single-page application. Being on call for the whole front end of Facebook would be a nightmare. I don't think there is anyone that knows how all of that works together. While instead, if you are on call on your feature team, on your team responsible for a specific area of your application, that's easier to manage. That's more business value that you can add and you can contribute to the company. And on top of that, you have innovation. As a developer, especially as a front-end developer, we know that we like to try new things. We like to play around with the latest framework, with the latest bundler with Webpack 5, and or whatever is coming next, because we want to try things, because the next thing could be the thing that is helping us more. And doing that in smaller chunks, because our micro-frontends are smaller application, it's much easier. You can even test what's going on in one micro-frontend. Let's suppose that Webpack 5 is out. You want to test it out before rolling it out to all your micro-frontends. You do that on a small micro-frontends. Does that work? I'm happy. How's the developer experience? It's awesome. Great. Let's learn from what we saw and move that learning to other micro-frontends. And in doing that, you have the freedom so that at the same time, you are completely framework agnostic, because those are completely separated micro-frontends, are completely separated single-page application. So you can have your sign-in flow using React and Mobex. You can go inside your main application page and maybe use RxJS or vue.js. It doesn't really matter. Each team is responsible to find the best tool for their job. And this is what we call innovation.
Good. So let's start to understand how we can do that, right? It sounds great, right? OK, before that, the first thing that I did is starting to research a bit who is trying to leveraging the same patterns, right? Because you need to understand a bit how the things are working. So I picked like 3 examples. There are obviously more. Recently, for instance, I was reading about IKEA that is doing something similar, embracing micro-frontends. And let's start with OpenTable, for instance. So OpenTable has a distributed team that is in different parts of the world. I mean, if I remember well, Australia, Europe, and New York. So as you can imagine, sorry, San Francisco. And as you can imagine, it's very difficult to have like overlapping time to discuss everything. So what they came up with, the X team came up with this logic of open components. It's an open source framework that you can use and start to use it tomorrow, potentially. The logic behind that is pretty smart. So what they are doing is doing server-side rendering and adding microservices and front-end all together. And they wrap these in and deliver inside the registry. Imagine like Docker registry, where you can pick your component and compose your page. So if, for instance, you have the header, you have the logic of the header, localization, and everything, the look and feel that is wrapped in a unique component, and you can start to compose your page when you need that. If you want to rewrite a new one, you can do that. So you have a flexibility that each single team is completely separated. Yes, they have like the technology stack that they want. Yes, and also you have the possibility to compose your page in the way that you want. Zalando, for instance, is another great example. Zalando is a fashion e-commerce. The interesting bit there is it's been a while that they are using microfrontends. At the beginning, there was Tailor.js that basically they were using HTML fragments in order to compose at runtime and cache on the CDN. And basically what they were doing is that each single team was developing multiple fragments, HTML fragments end-to-end, and then they had like this Tailor.js layer that was composing at runtime when a user was requesting a page. Now they are moving, since I think end of last year I read about that, they're moving to interface framework. That interface framework is something similar, but instead of using the HTML fragments, they're using components. So it's a component-based monorepo where they have all the components there, and basically through the request that is coming from the user, they are composing and instructing which is the element that they have to compose at runtime of the page, and they are serving the page. Then we have Spotify. I think everyone knows Spotify, right? So your desktop application currently is composed by web technologies. So they have like a layer in C++ on the background, but on top of it, there are multiple iframes that are communicating through an event bus. And the nice thing is, because the iframe by nature is a sandbox that is managing very well its own memory, is managing very well its own boundaries, and therefore what they can do is having, if you check the interface of your music player, you have several components. Each single component corresponds to a single page application. And this single page application is developed with different technologies, but vast majority of the time are JavaScript, HTML, right? And they can use whatever framework they want, because at the end of the day, it's a desktop application. They're not paying, let's say, for round trips or anything. They're just having that. Obviously, DAZN is a particular use case, because what we have is, let's say, millions of users that are consuming our live streams on multiple targets: console, TVs, we have web, mobile, really a lot of targets. And it's a very fragmented and complicated ecosystem. So what we have done? So the first thing that we have done is defining a manifesto. So how we can, let's say, create a microfrontend. So what is for us a microfrontend? So first of all, we said what we really like about microservices is that there you have an independent implementation. So Max said before that we want to have innovation, we want to have autonomy, we want to take our own decision inside the team. We don't have to share completely the vision of a couple of people. The other thing is, that is very important, avoid sharing logic. So one thing that we were very strict about is trying to avoid to have libraries that were shared across the entire stack, because that is creating friction. That is creating communication overhead. That's true. We have some code duplication, but it's not always an evil. It could be an enabler in this case. So then we have like a model around a business domain. So one of the key things for defining a microfrontend is using DDD. Domain-driven design came to rescue here because it's providing us a good framework to understand how our system works and slice it up in multiple domains. It works for APIs. It works also for microfrontends. Last but not least, we want to have one team that is owning a specific domain, because that showed us in the past that is working pretty well on the microservices. Why we cannot apply also on the front end? Often we forget about all the discovery that happen and all the challenges and trials that happen on the back end. Sometimes we need to embrace them and try to move on the front end. So what we have done there, we use like the DDD language here. So we have a domain that is DAZN, so our entire application. The main aim here is streaming live video and video on demand, right, for sports. Obviously, looking at how our users were using our application, it was fairly easy for us creating multiple subdomains. And usually a subdomain is, if the domain is creating this OTT platform for streaming video, obviously I have to arrive there, I have to subscribe in somehow, I need to see what is inside this web application. And in order to do that, I need a landing page, I need authentication pages, I need, I don't know, help to support my users. So we sliced up our application in multiple subdomains, creating these 5 subdomains: authentication, landing page, my account, customer support, and the main one, discovery and playback.
And So to recap, our microfrontends are 100% autonomous, and that's really a crucial point. So once you load one microfrontend, which is the second point, there is nothing else loaded on page. So you load one microfrontend at a time, and they are all independent with each other. So we have one team, one subdomain, and one microfrontends. And that's fairly straightforward. Also because we need to think about the microfrontends just as a normal single-page application. It's something that we don't need to teach you, especially for new joiners. We are a really fast-growing company, so we need to think about new joiner. We don't need to explain them how to use a new contract API or a new particular way of working, because a microfrontend, at the end of the day, is the holy trinity of front-end development. It's some HTML, JS, and CSS, as you would expect. And this fits in a way where you have all those pieces as microfrontends which are separated, which are beautiful. Each team is responsible of one is delivering value, and they all live in separated worlds. And then we have the user. We know that the user is one, and we know that we can load only one microfrontend per time. So there is clearly a missing bit in the story here, because someone has to decide what the user should load in terms of which microfrontends. Am I authenticated? Should I go there? Should I go there? The missing bit is what in microservices is called the orchestrator, and our orchestrator is called BOOTSTRAP. BOOTSTRAP sits right in the middle between our users and our microfrontends, and BOOTSTRAP is responsible for a various number of tasks. And one of the tasks, which is immediately and is straightforward to understand, is that it will be responsible for loading the different microfrontends. But exactly what is BOOTSTRAP? Because it's important to understand what is BOOTSTRAP in itself. BOOTSTRAP is just an indexed HTML file which contains some vanilla JavaScript. Again, vanilla is very important because we are not using any libraries inside BOOTSTRAP itself. And this tiny layer, just a few kilobytes, is actually that tiny for a reason, because it's the first thing that we are downloading when we go, for example, on www.DAZN.com. So the loading flow became that a user goes on DAZN.com, and the first thing that it downloads is BOOTSTRAP. So as soon as you go there, you download BOOTSTRAP. The UI will tell you that there is a loading spinner that inform the user that something is going on. Behind the scene, we have BOOTSTRAP running and doing all the logic in order to load the appropriate chapter, the appropriate microfrontends. The microfrontend is actually, in this case, is browse, when you can browse and click and watch all your sports. But at that stage, BOOTSTRAP downloaded the microfrontends. So the microfrontend gets loaded by BOOTSTRAP. But BOOTSTRAP is not only that. BOOTSTRAP is actually much more. And it has a few responsibilities and, of course, benefit. In terms of responsibilities, as you saw from the previous slide, is responsible for the application startup. So the way your application starts is BOOTSTRAP responsibility. All the microfrontends are not responsible of understanding how to pick the language, how to load properly, how to do this and how to do that. They focus on their business value only. And then we have client-side routing. Client-side routing means that inside the client, we can go from one microfrontend to another one just using BOOTSTRAP. And that's the beauty of it, because one microfrontend is not, doesn't contain the logic to routing to another microfrontend. Imagine that you finished your authentication flow, you're signing up, you're happy, you want to play some sports, and in that case, you are unmounting one microfrontend from the page, which is the authentication one, as Luca was explaining, and you are mounting the browse experience when you have the player, all the tiles, all the images, all the videos, and in that transition is handled by BOOTSTRAP and by the lifecycle API. Lifecycle, because it's important to understand at each time, is there a microfrontend loaded on page? Is there a microfrontend that is loading? Is there a microfrontend that is about to be unloaded? And stuff like that. And it will create a standard communication between the different, between the microfrontends. So they are unaware of where they are, but they talk to each other thanks to Bootstrap. And last but not least, input-output operation. We mentioned that we're not talking only about web. We are talking about multiple platforms that uses web. And by multiple platforms, we mean everything when we can run the DAZN, which are TV, set-top boxes, PlayStation 3, PlayStation 4, 5 probably. And all of this requires a layer of abstraction. Why a layer of abstraction? Because it's not guaranteed that you have local storage on all the devices. Just to give you an example, it's not guaranteed that you have a certain amount of space on all the devices, that you can store 5 meg of data on all the devices. And in order to do that, we don't want to put that logic inside the microfrontend, because the microfrontend teams working on the authentication should focus on authentication. That's the core value of that. They need to add value to the authentication, not thinking about, oh, I'm actually running this thing on Xbox, so I should take care of the fact that I can't store more than 30 meg or whatever. That's why we call this device API abstraction. And that was the last slide. We wanna say thank you with this, with the challenges that we had and that we think are important while scaling front-end application. The first challenge is scaling the teams. Scaling users, scaling servers is difficult. Scaling the teams is challenging as well. Scaling the teams means creating a developer culture. It means telling a story, telling a vision, and explain to people why we should go and follow that. And not only that, ask people to challenge that idea, because only ideas that get challenged will actually produce a better solution. And then we need to reduce communication overhead. We went from 3 developers to 200, 300. At the moment, in less than two years, we need to reduce the amount of communication across teams. And last but not least, innovate. If you have a smaller piece of code, you can innovate faster. And innovate faster means happy developers. Thank you very much.
Thank you.